you very much for coming out to this great session that we're about to get started with, Women in Trial Court Leadership, Struggles and Successes. Obviously, we have a very distinguished panel here with the moderator, Judge Roxanne Song-Ong, Chief Justice, Justice Rebecca Berch, the Honorable Pamela Dembe, Mary McQueen, and Patricia Tobias. There are full bios and course descriptions available on the website. This is a taped presentation. You'll receive an evaluation online after the conference concludes. Please fill that out for help for the presenters to know what worked and what didn't work, as well as the association. You can receive the CEU forms if anyone needs those. They're available online. And also, any attorneys can go to their own state bar for CLE things. And with that, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you such a distinguished and dedicated group of professionals. First of all, we have here as moderator for our panel, Judge Roxanne Song-Ong. She's the Chief Presiding Judge for Phoenix Municipal Court, and she was the first Asian woman judge in the state of Arizona, and the 2013 winner of the Arizona Supreme Court Judge of the Year. Next, we have the Honorable Pamela Dembe. She's been a common pleas judge for over 23 years in the state of Pennsylvania. And in 2013, she received the Brandeis Law Society's Benjamin Levy Community Service Award. Mary McQueen is the president of the National Center for State Courts. She was the first state court administrator who was a woman, as well as the first woman that was the president of National Center for State Courts. And she was served with the Washington State Office of the Courts from 1987 to 2004. Chief Justice Rebecca Berch. She was the Chief Justice for 5 years in Arizona, and appellate judge from 1998 on in the state of Arizona. And who am I missing? Patty Tobias. Okay, and Patricia Tobias has over 30 years as court leader in both the state and trial courts, and received the National Center for State Courts Warren E. Berger Award. So with that, please join me in welcoming this distinguished panel.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and I hope all of you can hear us. And we have been given 1 short hour to do this program, so I'm going to ask your forgiveness as I speak quickly, but I want to get to the good stuff, which is our panel, and they're going to go over some scenarios. I quickly put together what we're going to be doing today, talking about women in leadership. We're going to go over some statistical information, talk about some hypothetical fact scenarios, talking about the challenges and the struggles and lessons learned, and we're going to give you some tips, advice, suggestions that has worked for some of us, many of us, over the years. And let me quickly go through here. I want to start off with some interesting facts. Some of you may know this stuff already. I don't know. But do you know that women make up the majority of our population, over 50%. We earn about 60% of undergraduate degrees and 60% of all master's degrees in the United States. Women earn more than 44% of master's degrees, particularly in business management, including 37% of all MBAs. Women earn 47% of all law degrees, 48% of all medical degrees, and women are 47% of the U.S. labor force, 59% of the college-educated entry-level workforce. So think about that. All right, although women hold almost 52% of all professional level jobs, American women lag substantially behind men in leadership positions. Women are only 14% of executive officers, we're 8% of the top earners, and we're 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs. Now, in the medical field, women comprise 34% of all physicians and surgeons, but only 16% of the medical school deans. And in the legal field, women are 45% of associates, but only 25% of the non-equity partners in law firms, and only 15% of us are equity partners in law firms. Now, am I one? I think, look, I'm one slide behind. I'm sorry. All right. In the last decades of the 20th century, it brought considerable progress, as you all know, for women in professional advancement in the United States. And the gender wage gap narrowed, sex segregation in most professions greatly declined, and the percentage of women climbing the management ranks steadily rose. Although the rapid rate of change in the 1970s and 80s began to slow in the 1990s and into 2000s, as the narrowing of the gender wage gap stalled, the percentage of women in management jobs stagnated, but a notable increase occurred in the very top positions, and that did continue at that time. However, in the most recent years, the percentage of women in top management positions and on the corporate boards of America has stalled. In a broad range of fields, including women in top leadership positions in law, medicine, and in business, remain stuck at between 10 and 20% only. It's now estimated that at the current rate of change, it will take American women till 2085 to reach parity with men in leadership roles in our country. I want to show to you now a few statistics. I want to thank Joan Cochet of the National Center for State Courts, who helped us to gather some of these. These next few slides are particularly directed at courts and court leadership and women in those positions. As you can see, the Conference of Chief Justices of the State Courts, and the Conference of the State Court Administrators, we have statistics only dating back to 1984 through to 2014. And as you can see, in that early year, 1984, which was not so long ago, we only had one woman Chief Justice. We had 3 court state administrators. And today's date, we have a whopping only 22 Chief Justices who are women and 23 court directors or administrators of state courts. Women judges serving on state appellate benches. You can see we have statistics dating back to 1985 through to today's date. Back in 85, there was only 7% of the women, or justices that were women on state appellate courts, 23% in 1998, and 34% up to today's date. This is an interesting one, and I want to congratulate all of you who are in the ICM Fellows Program. And we have some statistics gathered from 1974 through to this year. And you can see in 1974, there were only 2 women enrolled in that class, 6%. And as you go down the years, you can see in 2014, our total class size was 19, 17 of which were women, which meant 89% or 90% of those enrolled were women. I have to say for the state of Arizona, I think we had something like 11 or 12 of you guys that went to Williamsburg, and they were all women except one lone male, who was Johnny C. Where's Johnny? He's in there? Okay, he didn't bother to come today. But it was exciting to see that on the National Center's website, all of those women graduating. Go girls, I'm telling you. All right, so now let's look at NACM. The National Association for Court Management. We have very few statistics, but dating as early as 2000, where 57% of us in membership are women. And it hasn't changed. It's been pretty steady, and we're at 59% now in 2014. The National Conference of Metro Courts, this is a very small organization as compared to National Center for Court Managers. We founded in 1963. We have about 100 members current date. And so 25% of that membership are women, which is about 25 of us. But here's an interesting fact, and it's kind of going towards what we talked about a little earlier. 4 out of the last 6 presidents have been women. Here's a glance at the ABA statistics from 2013, kind of in general, representation of women in state courts. The courts of final appellate jurisdiction courts, 32%, and courts of immediate appellate jurisdiction, 32%. State general jurisdiction courts, 25%. State limited and special jurisdiction courts, there are about 31% of us that are women. And all state court judges in the United States total, less than 30%, 27%. Here's a pie chart from the National Association of Women Judges, and we show that women, once again, a little less than 30%, 27%. The Judges Journal from the ABA back in 2009. These 2 tracks are showing the top line are women, and the bottom line are minorities that are judges in the United States back in 2009. So about 29%, again, close to 30% of us are women, and about 12.5% minorities. Now, here's what we're going to do to make this a little interesting, I hope. Our panelists are going to respond to very specific fact scenarios which address issues related to challenges that they have faced personally or other women have faced in court leadership positions. What our panelists are going to do are identify the issues, discuss and respond with some suggestions, and then in between these fact scenarios or hypotheticals, our faculty are going to intersperse with some top tips, some suggestions, some words of advice, some lessons learned. Some of our top tips and lessons learned and so forth may not relate to the most immediate hypothetical or even the next hypothetical, but we had so many of these as we were working towards preparation of the session, we wanted to include as many of them as possible so that hopefully they speak to some of you. All right. Fact scenario number 1, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Chief Justice Rebecca Berch, and she's going to go ahead and go through that with us.
Okay, fact scenario number 1. You supervise 3 division directors, 2 are male and 1 is a woman. All 3 directors are paid the same salary. The male directors are married with families and the female director is single. Your supervisor directs you to lower the female's salary, saying that she doesn't have the same family and financial obligations and therefore she should be paid less.
Rumble, rumble.
I can see we're all happy with this.
Let me interject that these are all based on true factual patterns.
I had kind of the same reaction that you just had when I first read this, but let's take it back to a slightly more normal situation. Have any of you ever found that you were paid less than a male colleague for doing similar work? You don't have to raise your hands. If it didn't happen to you, have you ever had a woman friend complain that she was paid less than a male colleague for doing similar work? I mean, look, if you read the papers, if you read some of the articles that we referenced in the materials here, you can see that this is standard practice across the United States, that women are paid somewhere, but depending on the field, depending on how old the county is, between 75% and 85% of what men are paid for doing the same jobs. So this is a common real-life situation. Let's take a look at this fact scenario. And Roxanne, because of time constraints, I'm assuming I should just go through and sort of give my thoughts on it.
I would, and you know what, I think if anyone wants to stop us because they just have a burning question, we'll take those, but you know, we want to get through a lot of these because we want to hear from all of our panelists. So,
okay. So the first question is, what kinds of diversity issues does this raise? And clearly, obviously, you've all pegged gender, right? Gender diversity. There are a couple kinds of other diversity that issues that are in there. One is marital status, and another is family obligation status. So there's a lot going on in this hypothetical. If you look at the family status or the marital status aspect of it, I assume the suggestion to pay the men more assumes that they are the primary breadwinner in the family, that they have primary obligations for supporting the family. But think about this. Have any of you heard about this? If a woman has a family, what would they say about her? She's the secondary supporter, so you don't have to pay her as much. So she loses on this family obligation status from either direction. So would you pay the men more than, or less than if they got a divorce? Make them come in and say, I'm going to remit part of my salary because now I don't have a family? I don't think so. I mean, I didn't say the question is, should you? And if the question were, will the men come in and voluntarily remit, I'd suggest the answer is probably not. So you have those kinds of things going on. And if the woman gets married, is she then entitled to a raise, or do we have to start waiting until she has kids? Yeah, all of this smells wrong, right? So we all know that this is just bad stuff. So then the question becomes, how do you handle it? Now, in the scenario that's posed, this request is coming from your supervisor. So you're in a little bit of a dicey position. There are a few things that you can always do to protect your interests. One is you can just mention that you're quite busy, ask them to put that in writing. Your hope is that you never hear from them again. That's a slightly risky strategy if you get sued for, on a pay discrimination suit, and that's in your file that, you sort of protested and so forth. You could be setting your court up for punitive damages. So these are risky strategies. I mean, I think the hope there would be that the person would be going, oh, I don't want to put that in writing, and then you just never hear about it again. So there are things that you could do. I also have to say that I would probably handle that differently now than I would as a much younger person. Well, before we get there, let's just say this. You could also express a little bit of discomfort to your immediate supervisor who's asking you to do this, and then you could think about going over that supervisor's head to a senior level supervisor. Again, risky for your jobs as well. I become less sympathetic with things like this as I've gotten older. I'm also no longer Chief Justice, so I tend to be a little bit freer about what I say about things. So there was a time when I would have pussyfooted around about it. Now, I probably would just explain to that person that just off the top of my head, treating men and women with the same level of seniority who seem to be doing the same job differently, just based upon their gender or their family status, strikes me as the wrong thing to do and possibly illegal. You don't have to put yourself in the position of giving a legal opinion, but if you put it that way, I would hope it wouldn't, that the issue would go away. If the supervisor insists, right, this is your supervisor and you don't want to lose your job and you've tried suggesting they put it in writing, they still insist that you do this, I would encourage you to document the record so that you have in the file that you thought that this was improper, that you advised the supervisor that it was likely improper. You might want to talk to your HR folks about it, find out whether your HR people have had experience with this supervisor along these lines. Even if, well, in my position, I would have just sent the supervisor for training as well. Even if you convince that supervisor not to go through with this, let me toss this out. Do you then have an obligation, either yourself or through HR, to ask them to go back through decisions those people have made throughout your agency, your division, your department, whatever it is, to see whether there's other discrimination in the ranks based solely on gender or family status? So those are my thoughts.
Outstanding. Thank you. Is that a hand up back there? There is. Yes, please stand.
You know, you talk about maybe taking more roundabout approach to talking to the supervisor. And I just wondered, what extent you would open yourself, because at least if you were very direct, you went above your protected by whistleblower. If you're not so direct, if you get a feeling that you don't like it, you may suffer some consequences that don't have the protection of a whistleblower.
You are absolutely right. It partly depends on if you think this thing is going to go further. Sometimes people will get a stupid idea, and if you ask them to put it in writing, or you just say, boy, you know, that just feels wrong to me. I think that may be discriminatory and perhaps illegal. Sometimes those things go away. It also depends on whether in the long run this person's going to continue to be your supervisor and whether that's going to create problems for you. So there are real life considerations that you have to balance. Yes, if you're already ticked off at the supervisor and you're thinking down the road about a lawsuit, go your route, go over his head, go to the supervisor, document, and have forth with your lawsuit. But if you're thinking that you can handle this internally, improve that person's education level and sensitivity level, you can try the gentler approach first.
Thank you. Mary?
Is this on? Okay. I'm sorry, can you hear? Okay. I was the subject of this particular hypothetical, and the way that I chose to was to say, is this not? Oh, there you go. Is to say, well, I think I have to check the personnel policies, and if you're asking me to waive those, I have to have that in writing. But let's assume that you want to go down that road. Let's think about what our response is going to be to the press.
Mm-hmm.
That's always a good one.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And so it wasn't because the first response was, so you're going to refuse to follow a direct order. Does your whole job career kind of flash in front of your face, right? And so what I always try to do is, especially in these situations, as the chief said, when they're, prima facie illegal, to try to say, okay, I'm trying to help you out here, so let's think through this as to what the bottom line's going to be. So, just kind of assuming, well, let's check the personnel policies. I'll get you a copy of that. And if that doesn't stop it and they come back, say, okay, if you're asking me to waive policy XYZ, that we're required to have that in writing. So it's not you. Do you see what I mean? And then the third level is, okay, if in fact that is the way we're going to go, how do we prepare our response to the press, to the lawsuit, to our internal counsel? But the final thing I would say is, if you really feel up against it, go outside and talk to a lawyer, just to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I think we're hearing some actual scenarios and talking about just really trying to use a bit of diplomacy because of the stickiness of the situation and trying to convince him on the other end, what is this going to look like? And make them think that it was their idea that we're looking into the law and HR provisions, so on and so forth. And I think that's a very diplomatic way to do it. Gets you out of hot water for future, but it makes us all think, together. And it is their idea that, hey, maybe we ought to think this through a little bit. All right, very good. I'm going to go ahead and move forward, and please hold any of the questions. We decided, because we have 4 or 5 phenomenal hypotheticals, and we want to get through them, we would take 1 or 2 questions at the very most, but we want to kind of go through them. Please hold your questions, and we will come back to those if time does permit. Thank you. Now, here's some of those terrific tips that we were going to talk about. And some of these may or may not relate to the hypotheticals as mentioned, but these are some suggestions, some advice that our esteemed panelists have taken in and included in their repertoire in terms of their career path to where they are today. So the first one starts out with Justice Berch. It says, lean in. So Rebecca, can you see that there?
Yes.
Okay.
I got the idea, essentially, and it's not a new idea, from the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. But don't be afraid to say yes, and if you have to, don't be afraid to affirmatively say no. The idea, I think, is that women can sometimes lack confidence to step forward, to volunteer themselves. Women sometimes perceive that they're maybe not as good as some areas, and they won't step forward. So be there, speak up, volunteer, and get involved in processes. This is the only way we get to know you, and this is how we learn to rely on you and call on you again and again and again. And frankly, in life, that's how you move ahead. So do it when you need to.
Okay.
Along those same lines, one of the lessons learned truly for me and in preparing for this is confidence matters as much as competence. I never worried as a woman leader that I wasn't competent. I knew I was competent, but I always struggled with confidence. I still do. I'm sitting here listening to Justice Berch going, oh, look, she did that so well, talking about that scenario, and I'm doing the second scenario, and I'm never going to be as articulate as she is. I mean, but that's how I roll. It's a constant struggle.
We all do.
And I would submit that I've seen more women struggle with confidence than I do see men struggle with confidence. So I have observed that. In fact, it's the men that should worry about confidence.
Thank you.
Just just saying. But that really is, if you struggle with that confidence, work on it. Don't struggle your whole career. Don't, 30 years later, again, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, how am I going to do my scenario as well as Justice Berch's? Really work on that, because it's so important as a leader that we be confident, or at least act like we're confident.
Thank you, Patty.
To match up with our competence. And we are. We are competent, and we can be competent. But we have to be an effective leader. So that's just one of those lessons that I've had to learn the hard way and still struggle with. But it is really important for us as women leaders to project that confidence, not only to be at the table, but to be confident at the table and speak out at the table.
Thank you so much, Patty. I know, Mary, that you've touched on the next tip, and I don't know whether you want to embellish on that or not. And okay, we'll go into the next one. This one is also Mary McQueen's.
And I'm going to be speaking to this one in the hypothetical, so I'll defer to Patty.
Okay, Patty, the next one is yours. Learn to make the right choices.
Okay, and I'm going to skip to my fact scenario
Very good.
because this is all about making choices with the family and the work.
Here we go.
So the second fact scenario was you have two children, one in middle school, the other in elementary school. Parent-teacher conferences are scheduled well in advance, and we all signed up. The day before you're to attend the parent-teacher conference, your supervisor asks you to represent the court at an important meeting to be held the day of your scheduled parent-teacher conference. What do? We've all been there, and as I was mentioning, it's not just about children. Now it's about balancing parents and their care needs, and it's all about balancing what we do every day on the job and what we need to do every day with our family. And it's not just about being a woman, but it applies to all of us. It applies to our policies in the court. But I've had to learn a few things over the years in this regard, constantly making those choices. So what would I do with that first one? I'd be shuffling it right away from the get-go. I'd be calling the parent, can I reschedule? What's the flexibility here? Can I do it later? What time do I need to be here for the court? Can I do that earlier? And so you're juggling like that all the time, but trying not to have the direct conflict. There are times where you do have the direct conflict, and one of the things that I had to learn, and it is so clear as a bell to me, my kid, the court had a big conference, big meeting, lots of decisions. I had to present it, and it was the Supreme Court. And my kid had a performance, 5th grade, 6th grade school performance, Fiddler on the Roof. I remember it clearly. Yeah, had to sing. He was singing a song. Okay, so I had it figured out. I'll go to the dress rehearsal in the morning, present all of the recommendations to the court in the afternoon. Okay, I have a plan. I can do it. I go to the performance in the morning, and it was just wonderful. I could not miss the real deal that afternoon. I had to be there. My kid had a singing performance. I mean, it was just, I couldn't miss it. I had to go to the court, and it was the first time I had ever asked for an accommodation. I said, I just can't be here. Can we reschedule? I said, I am so sorry, but this is just really important to me. And they were like, oh, sure, fine, no big deal. I mean, this is like a life-changing moment for me. So the lesson learned is do the best you can, balance, but also ask. You may have to ask for accommodation, and that's okay. And again, whether you're a woman or a man in that situation, sometimes you have to ask for the accommodation to do what you need, what you know is the right thing to do. So
Terrific. Thank you, Patty. All right, here's some more terrific tips. Patty, this is yours as well, and I think you just touched on that.
Well, learn to make the right choices. The line has become much brighter for me as I've gained more experience. It was very clear. With the kids, I was always trying to balance. When I was caring for my elderly mom, If she was in the hospital, I was in the hospital. You know, I was right there. It didn't matter what the court was doing or what my responsibilities were. That line became much brighter. So again, just always try and balance, but you'll make the right decision, and you got to take care of family.
Thank you. Mary?
Some of you may not know, but I was actually a single mom with 6-year-old twins. And I had to have a backup plan. And I learned that I had a circle of friends that we kind of shared some of those same scenarios. And that we networked basically together to say, if something comes up and I can't be there, you'll pick up my kids, you'll feed them dinner, and if necessary, they'll spend the night.
Great idea.
And when available, I would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important for us to develop those networks, but have a plan.
Outstanding. All right. Pam?
This tip has nothing to do with the scenario we've just covered, except that the statement about never publicly blaming the people who work under you or alongside you. Pretty much the same rules that make family life travel on a more or less civilized path most of the time. It never helps. The minute I say, boy, you really screwed that one up, didn't you? Where are you going from there? And people who work under you, and often the people who work alongside you, like your kids, don't have a lot of avenues to respond, or at least with any hope of winning. Although kids always do get you in the end, as we all know. But that's what that one's about.
Perfect. Thanks, Pam. All right, a couple of more tips. Justice Berch?
Yeah, I think this one's fairly obvious. Work with people, be consultative, build coalitions, get buy-in. Just a general leadership tip. And I think I was reading some notes here from a prior session. I won't read them. They were quite hilarious. I'll share them with you afterward, especially if you buy me a glass of wine.
That's one of the tips, by the way.
Yeah. Well, they were along the lines of, suck up to the boss, don't speak unless you're spoken to. That kind of leadership model I don't think is in vogue anymore, and that's probably because it's not a good idea. If you're a leader, build consensus, get coalitions, ask the affected constituencies so that they can have input. I think when people are invested in something you want to do, it's much easier to bring them along.
Absolutely. Thank you. Pam, you have the next one.
Really more of the same as at home. If you thank your significant other for emptying the dishwasher or thank the kids for taking the dog out or whatever, they're more likely to do it again. And people at work, it's astonishing how often they don't get thanked for the work they've done or told, that was a great job you've done. It really helps us out. And it's so easy to do. And nowadays it's really easy to do it not only in person, but also an email that goes out to a number of other people so that everybody gets it. It really not only makes people feel much more rewarded and much more invested in continuing to work in the courts, it somehow helps them become more creative. I had a good idea and it worked out well, so they come to you with more ideas.
Well, and getting back to our topic, how many of you have heard that when a man does something, he's assertive, but when a woman does something, what a bitch. And I'm telling you, what Judge Dembe just said, a polite thank you, please, with everything and every conversation with your lower level staff, your colleagues, and your superiors, I'm telling you, it works miracles.
You can still be a bitch, though, because that's fun.
Well, I don't know about that.
Sometimes you have to be to
But
get
I
the
mean,
work done.
this is the key. And people have said, well, she never says thank you. She doesn't even acknowledge me. And these are the common courtesies that I think as leaders, sometimes you get so busy doing the job, you just forget to be a human being. Don't forget to be a human being. Okay, we're on fact scenario number 3. Mary?
So this is one where you're enjoying a birthday lunch with your colleagues and one of your coworkers shares a joke that demeans women. And I think our first responsibility is to evaluate the situation. I mean, how offensive was this might temper the way you respond. Even at the lowest level, one of the things that I find have worked, especially in mixed company, is to just say, I don't get it. I don't get it. Or, did you really say, bitch? And sometimes what my children say is I use that mommy stare. Right? And so if you escalate up where it's very offensive, sometimes a response is, did your wife tell you that? Or would you share that with your daughter? And if it's very offensive and the person that shared this joke has had a history, I might say, can we go outside just a minute? I think that there are just ways of dealing with it. But if it's a chronic person that really has offended, and I'm talking in a very offensive way, I think you can say, well, you know, we really enjoyed celebrating the birthday, but the rest of us are going to be leaving now. But I think the worst thing we can do is not respond in some way, because you know, silence sends a message, and that can be a positive message or a negative message. And but sometimes, especially if it's someone, I had a Chief Justice one time make us, and he appointed a lot of women, and we're very supportive of women, equal pay issues. Said at a judges conference, and you know, behind every judge is a good woman. And the women judges were very offended by that. And I had to go to him, and he was saying it in a very positive way. And he was actually very hurt that he had been misunderstood. So I think that's what I'm saying. Evaluate the situation and try, if you can, to have that person recognize their own offense.
Good, thank you. All right, some more terrific tips. Mary, the next one is yours as well.
And I think I covered this.
I think you did.
You know, use
Okay.
kind of these personal questions
Very
to kind
good.
of have the person realize the offense.
All right, Patty?
Well, the strive for authenticity over perfection, again, as someone who has struggled with confidence, you can imagine how that was difficult to learn, that I could just be myself, even if I wasn't as articulate as Justice Berch. Maybe it was okay. I could just be myself and share my experience and share what I have learned and share my sincerity and my passion and what I had learned. But that took me, again, a number of years, because I was going to be perfect, and I was going to be this, and I was going to be that. But when I finally learned that I could just be me, warts and all, it was just fine. But I also want to go back to Mary's point about evaluate the situation. I reflected upon my experience in Idaho for this presentation, and the most that I have really encountered is what I would call little cowboy talk. Most recently it was a member of the legislature talking about carrying budgets, and carrying budgets for these couple of agencies was like, dating the ugly girls in high school. It was like, ooh, again, it wasn't terrible. It was a little cowboyish, but it didn't demand any of the scenarios that Mary had raised. It wasn't that bad. It was a little cowboyish, and so it just was a matter of saying, oh my goodness, and so just a little bit of a reaction.
Or getting the last guy to ask you to the prom.
Yeah. I'm not as quick as Mary with a good response, so I couldn't come up with that. But anyway, evaluate the situation, and you'll deal with it appropriately. And there is a range of options, so always think about that.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, sometimes as a leader, you simply have to make a decision. You might remember that my last tip was be consultative, establish groups, form committees, get buy-in from other people. This is the flip side of it. After you've done that for a while, finally you just have to make a decision. So you get the best information you can, and it's not necessarily that the decision you're going to make comports with the will of the majority or the will of the loudest speakers, but every once in a while you gather the information and then you just have to say, okay, I've evaluated it, this looks like a good plan for our court system, so here's the way we're going to go at it. As chief, we had a group of presiding judges, and we would meet quarterly, sometimes more often telephonically, and before I would appoint each one as a presiding judge of a county, I'd explain to them that we'll have these meetings at which we'll decide some pretty important things. And I want your input from the point of view of your county. Many of our counties here in Arizona are quite rural. We have Maricopa and Pima that are fairly urban. Beyond that, they're quite rural, and they sometimes have a different perspective. But what I did say is that once we as a team make a decision, I need to know that you're going to be on our page, that you're going to be with us and move in the direction that we as a team have decided is in the best interest of the court system. I need to have you say that to me before I can appoint you. And it was a big help. And then we would go through these processes of consulting, having our committees, bringing in people to talk to us, but then we just do what we had to do. And if things go a little bit south, then you just have to say, I did the best I could, it was my decision. And then explain what you're going to do to make it better.
You know, it's so interesting, you know, when the Chief Justice, or let's say one of your managers makes a decision, and they are a Chief Justice who you have a great deal of confidence in, who you know vetted the thing thoroughly before making that final decision, even those of us who may not, you know, at first glance agree with it, we're going to say, well, you know, she had to have consulted the other PJ. She had to have done this and that. And if that's what we need to do for the state, you know, we're on board. But, you know, some of it was painful. But you have to know that at that level, what goes into that decision and the vetting of it is far more than just what's on that black and white administrative order. You know that. All right. Okay, let's move on. And some more tips. Pam?
Well, this business is making mistakes. And of course, some of them will be the little ones, like you have her scenario and you underreact or more likely overreact. And some of them will be the kinds of things that Justice Berch was talking about, where you're making a policy decision and it doesn't work out. Well, just pretending that the emperor has clothes is probably not going to work that well in the long run. People will stop respecting you. With that kind of decision, you know, you can say, oops, I didn't handle that so well. I was caught off guard, frankly. Sorry if I was too harsh, or sorry if I didn't jump on it fast enough, and let it go. That's enough for that kind of thing. If it's a policy type issue, then okay, admit it. We didn't take X into account sufficiently. And then meet with the people who were involved in the original decision-making and or those that should have been involved, and figure out how we don't make that mistake again. And sometimes it's, you know damn well, it's somebody down the chain from you who fed you bad information or didn't look into something thoroughly enough. And rather than beat them up, how can we make sure that we don't get caught like this again? How can we change what we're doing? And that way, kind of lifts everybody's
There you go. Lessons learned. Okay, we're on fact scenario number 4. So Pam, that's yours.
Okay. So your supervisor asks you and a co-worker of the opposite gender to attend a meeting, blah, blah, blah. Your supervisor's trying to decide which of you will be made project director of this new initiative, which is the next step up your career ladder. During the discussion, your supervisor asks each of you about your family obligations. Well, as with many things, I have, the way Patty has painfully worked on confidence, I've painfully learned that sometimes when people say something, I don't understand where they're coming from. So don't immediately run full tilt down the path of you sexist pig while you're it's not likely to work well. The supervisor, whatever, may well have legitimate concerns about the time and energy commitments of this project. So probably the place to start from is, are you concerned that this project will involve time beyond our usual 9 to 5 hours? Or that it will interfere with people's vacation plans and the like? And if so, don't even bother to wait for an answer. Probably be a good thing for you to spell out for us as best you can what's going to be involved so that both of us can evaluate what we're going to need to commit to this and whether there are changes we should make, and deal with it that way. I mean, it's really unlikely that the supervisor is deeply interested in how many days a week you have to take kids to ballet lessons or whatever. It is more likely, although you don't know till you ask a few more questions, a sort of inherent feeling that maybe women aren't reliable enough. On the other hand, it may well be that unbeknownst to you, the other guy has all sorts of family obligations that you haven't even heard of. So just as with many of these things, don't assume that the he's a sexist pig scenario is the one and only one out there. And number two, if it is, find out why it's relevant to what we're about here.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific suggestion. Ask questions. You know, if the, general inquiry doesn't give you enough and it appears that it's the, sexist pig trail that he's going down, ask a few questions. And it may be exactly as Judge Dembe indicates. So I think that's a terrific diplomatic way to do it. Ask a few more questions. Do you need to know about our time constraints, whatever it may be. So we're ready for a few more tips. All right. So Pam, the next one is yours.
Well, I'm sure this doesn't happen to any of you. For judges, it's the case where, you just keep putting it to the bottom of the pile or hiding it in the middle rather than coming. Oh, you've noticed that. Or any one of a number of decisions. And every now and then there is a really good, I have to wait till next Tuesday to find out if, and there's some very specific, but otherwise, I've found over time that when that's going on with something, it means you don't like the answer you're going to have to give or the decision you're going to have to make. And in that case, it's not going to get any better. You keep putting it off, and then you start waking up at 3 in the morning thinking about it, and that's when you really have to say, stop. So try to catch yourself a little earlier in that cycle, because it really won't get any easier, and in fact, quite often gets more difficult because you forget stuff, like facts that you need to go into it if you've pushed it off long enough. So,
and Pam, that becomes easier, doesn't it? That quicker decision making?
Yeah.
Because I know that was a struggle for me for a long time, and then I decided, everyone's waiting on you. What are you waiting for? Give the answer. You're not going to change your mind, so give the answer that the decision you're going to make.
Yep.
Hey, Patty.
Well, another lesson that I've always, that I've learned, I guess, over the years is the taking risks. And not just in the position, get involved in this activity or this new project, but also personally. What are some things that I can do to challenge myself? the focus is on that choosing some growth. As a woman leader, I think it is important that we push ourselves to take those risks, to challenge ourselves, to learn new things, to take on new opportunities, to take on new projects, to take on new areas of responsibility. So I also have to let you know that I'm practicing this truly after 20 years in the Idaho courts, where, you know, I've got things running, I love it, we're accomplishing great things, I've got a great team. I decided to just, throw it up, relocate, and accepted a position with the National Center for State Courts. So I just threw my life up, you know, totally gave it all. You know, I've taken big risks, but challenging ourselves. So if anybody wants to challenge themselves and come out to Idaho, apply for my position. It's a wonderful position. So challenge yourself at all times.
Cowboys and all.
Cowboys and all. Cowboys and all. They're well-trained cowboys.
Thank you. Mary?
This may have been better phrased to say, find another way of saying no. Because I think what I was trying to say, when I left the court in Washington State, it was kind of funny. The Supreme Court justices gave me a dinner, you know, and I thought I had been very diplomatic. 25 years I worked out there, and one of the justices, when they were kind of roasting me, said, "Mary, we know that 'have you thought of' really means no." So I think when you're first faced with some kind of proposal or request, even if it's within your work group, it doesn't necessarily have to be the supervisor kind of relationship. When you say no, or that really is ridiculous, you shut down the conversation. It shuts down kind of the brainstorming. And so, you know, it's better to say, well, have you thought of, or if we did this, would that change it? And then if it's really something with a supervisor, you know, like we talked about the first one, I'll say, okay, we can do that. Now help me figure out what our response is going to be when we get the call from. And that, fill in the blank, the legislature, the press, the other judges. I just think the tip I wanted you to walk away with was trying to find ways to introduce additional issues that person would see it as collaborative rather than opposition.
Very good. All right. Rebecca, I think the next one's yours.
It is, but can I do one quick follow-up on that last one?
Please do.
Does anybody here, have you ever studied improvisational comedy? See, a couple of you have. What is the first rule of improvisational comedy? Yes, and. Right, yes, and. You never say no. And why don't you say no? Because it cuts off the conversation. Do you know how to ride a horse? Yes, I do, and here's what happened that time. Improvisational comedy is where a comedy troupe gets together and they keep building on and scenarios keep getting more and more ridiculous. But the first rule is you never say no, because it cuts off conversation. And that just ties into what Mary was saying. And it actually ties back to what Patty was saying. Take risks, choose growth, and challenge ourselves. I think women tend to be rule followers. You know, we're very safe bet to a point as leaders because we won't embarrass people. We don't usually color. We color inside the lines, right? We don't color outside. But when senior managers are looking for a court system to pilot a new program or something like that, they're looking for ones who, not the ones who are going to say, well, my rules are such that I couldn't possibly do that. We're looking for the ones who will say, I think we could do that. There are a couple rules that stand in our way. Tell me that. There are rules. We can change them. And we did a lot. That's why you have pilot programs. So just tying together these last two, take risks and never say no. Have some fun with life. The next one ties in a little bit as well. A leader has to have a vision of what he or she wants to accomplish and then communicate it clearly so that everybody gets on board. That's sort of the big picture message, but it applies on a smaller scale to just trying to get line things done every day. Tell people what you want them to accomplish. It's easier for them to accomplish it when you do that. Not much more to say on that.
Very good. Thank you. Mary?
I think that finding a champion or finding a partner is really important in trying to bring new and innovative ideas. All of us have heard about pilot projects, but scale it down. It may be a rule that you think needs to be changed or a new process that you want to talk about. Well, go to a judge that you know is respected, or a colleague that you know has a lot of sway with other members of the unit you work in, and have that discussion with them. Because I always looked for the trial court judge who I thought was going to give me the most opposition, because usually if there was a disagreement, it's because they probably knew something that I didn't know, or I was probably coming from a perspective that they didn't know. And if I could get the most skeptical person to be the guinea pig or the pilot, and it might come out looking a little bit different than what I had first envisioned, but I guarantee you it would be better. And the fact that you got this skeptical person as the champion in the long range will ensure more adoption.
I think that's brilliant, and I think that, that buy-in piece is so important, and going to that person who's the biggest skeptic. And once they not only agree to it, they sometimes become the champion for it, and they lead the charge. So that's a brilliant strategy, I think, used very effectively. All right, we are on fact scenario 5. We've got a couple of minutes left, so we held this out as a possible use of time, but because we only have 2 minutes left, my trusty timekeeper is here, I wanted to give the final couple of minutes to our panelists so that they could put some final thoughts together for any of you. And I'm going to go ahead and start over here with Rebecca Berch, our Chief Justice.
Well, I think we've done a good job, having thought about this ahead of time with a group of bright people led by a good moderator, in pulling out what we think are a lot of the important aspects of leadership. And honestly, they apply to men or women. Women, I would say, we tend to be rule followers. We tend to be group joiners, as the statistics at the beginning showed. We tend to seek out educational opportunities, but we don't tend so much to be risk takers, to be those who speak up in meetings with a clear, defined message. And I think that's where we need to put some effort.
Great, thank you. Patty.
It's been my privilege to be a leader in the courts for, again, over 30 years, and I just encourage each and every one of you to go for it. If you're not in a leadership capacity today, think about it. If you have an opportunity to expand your scope of responsibilities, take it on. If you have an opportunity to be involved in NACM, do it. Be on a committee, be on the board. Just take every opportunity to contribute to the important work that we do. I've not experienced difficulties unique to being a woman, I don't think. I think I've experienced challenges simply being a leader, but boy, how rewarding it has been, how fun it has been, how much I have learned, and therefore how much I've been able to contribute. So go for it.
Thank you. Pam.
Earlier we talked about the stalled revolution, and to some extent that's inevitable. I think our daughters didn't realize that they would have to keep chugging uphill. But I think also, no matter how you slice and dice it, certainly in our lifetimes, and even the younger among you, your lifetimes, women are still going to have two very different and not always congruent sets of responsibilities. And I still see some anger literature out there. Boy, it's not fair, we have to do all this stuff. Well, look at it the other way. We are privileged. We have many more choices than men do. We have many more ways to be rewarded than men do for the most part. And all right, so your kitchen floor isn't going to be sterile enough. Use the 5-second rule. Or just send everything for somebody else to iron. So we have to make choices that we wouldn't want to, because we all think we need to be perfect at everything, but we can be damn good at a whole bunch of things and still have just so much variety in our lives and so many sources of reward.
Great, thank you, Mary.
Some of you may remember a longtime state court administrator from Minnesota, Pseudo Sal. And this even predated Patty coming to Casca as the state court administrator in Idaho. And Sue and I, when we would go to these conferences, used to kind of joke to each other that we would know when women had finally become more competitive for these positions is when we had to wait in line in the women's room. Because believe me, there were times it was just us. And so I have to say, as I went to my room between lunch and this conference, there was someone, one of us, who a woman participant in this conference, who was having to go up to her room because the line was so long in the restroom. But the final thing I want to leave you with is when I was appointed the court administrator in Washington State, I asked the Chief Justice, because it was a big deal about being the first woman. I had to stop and think, oh yeah, I guess I'm the first woman, right? I mean, it just didn't occur to me. You just work and you get the job done. And he said, it's because you're a trusted confidant. You don't gossip. We know that when we close the door, we can be ourselves. You're going to tell us what you really think. And we all have to have someone that'll say the emperor has no clothes. But to this, and so somebody asked me one time, what was, the single thing that resulted in job security? I knew where all the bones were buried. And so I think at times it's very difficult, especially when your colleagues are saying, well, why did they do that? Not to just say, well, you don't know that this, and this is happening. Don't do it. Trust and respect come at a high price, and they can be lost very quickly.
Absolutely. Please help me in thanking our wonderful panelists.